Let me start over. So here we go. All right. So we do have the class website and the computer science website, which are available to you all as resources for any information regarding the program or the class itself. So if I click, let me do this real quick so you can see my mouse. If I click on the computer science website, you'll see here, it takes us to the computer science page and the event. So we do have an event coming up tomorrow, Building the Open Bridge Intro to Open Source Way by Red Hat. That is tomorrow. It's from 8:30 to 5 p.m. and it's for HBCU students. So it's for you all to learn about open source and why it's important. For example, open source Android operating system that we use on cell phones is entirely open source. If you wanted to, you could download the entire Android operating system and create your own custom operating system for whatever device you like. That's the beauty of open source. It grants you that ability to modify, alter, and delete pieces of code or pieces of whatever technology that it is at your own discretion. So they're introducing you to that. Now it is from 8:30 to 5 p.m. I know it's a long time. You can come in and pop out as you so please, but please take advantage of that. The registration link is here, and it's all virtual, so the virtual link will be sent to you once you register. And I did want to talk about the class website. Now this is your universal source for everything relating to this class. So we have our schedule on here, and I have modified the schedule to include next week as makeup. So next week is midterms. I have all the PowerPoints up here. I need to add lecture 12 and then today's lecture. All of the videos are up here as well. Now, do keep in mind, these are YouTube videos. So you can go to the YouTube channel, Shaw Computer Science, and get access to all these videos as well. I will be posting that event tomorrow to the YouTube channel as well. You have links to all your quizzes, labs, assignments, and then resources. This is where you would have went to download NetBeans. And I also put up exam study guides right here as well. So you can look here and look at the study guide that I put up. I also put an announcement out on Moodle with the same study guide. I'll try to get that out earlier next time for exam 2 and for the final. But I just wanted to let you know this is available. All the videos, everything, slides are available on here. Now I'll try to post today and Monday's video, hopefully today or tomorrow. Any questions about the class, website?
I don't have a question about that, but I was looking at our Moodle page today, and it still says that assignment 8 and lab 8 is due next week. So is that right, or?
No, I'm going to adjust that. I haven't adjusted the due dates yet.
Okay, I was just double asking.
Yeah, it's just a whole process in Moodle. I'll get to it. Thank you for reminding me. All right. So lecture 13, for loops. So if you think back to last class, we talked about while loops. And while loops are great when there's a condition that you want to happen and you want to keep repeating something over and over again. So last class, I adjusted one of our labs to where if the user inputs something incorrectly, something that I don't want, I want it to repeat itself until they enter something in that I do want. I can modify, or I have logic to respond to. But with that while loop, I didn't know when it would end. The user could keep putting in incorrect input until the end of time, right? And that while loop would just keep running. Hey, that's invalid, input another number. That's invalid, input another number. Invalid, input over and over and over again until they input a valid number. Well, I don't know when that's going to happen. And so that while loop just keeps going, keeps going, keeps going. A for loop, on the other hand, we know that there's going to be a beginning and an end, right? There is no going forever. There is no this condition until it's true or until it's false. Now, for loops do work with conditions, but it's basically keep going over and over again until you reach 10, until you reach 20, until you reach 30, whatever that number is, but there is a beginning and there's an end. So again, for loops explicit. We know there is a beginning and an end. For example, we want to repeat code exactly 5 times. We can do that in a while loop, but a for loop explicitly states there's a beginning and an end. Whereas a while loop is good for conditional, right? We don't really know while. So for example, if you have a smartwatch or a cell phone and you go for a run, your phone is constantly tracking your measurements, right? Your measurables. So your velocity, your linear acceleration, so on and so forth. That while loop, whatever it is inside that phone, is going to keep running while the user is in motion. Once the user is out of motion, stop the loop. While the user is in motion, do this. Calculate the measurements. When the user is not in motion, stop. So that while loop is really good for that because it doesn't know when it will begin, when it will end, but it can keep going over and over again. You wouldn't necessarily use a for loop because a for loop has a beginning and an end. So when we were doing our lifting example, right, we want to do 10 reps. We know that there's a beginning and an end. You start at rep 1 and you end at rep 10. So for 10 times, repeat this action. And here's the structure of a for loop, right? We begin with a for statement. Then we create an integer to hold our index, whatever we are in this for loop. So int I equals 0. Right? We're creating that first index. We start at 0. We have a condition. We want I to be less than whatever number we put in here. And then it increments I each time. All right? So say, for example, I put 10 in for number. I will increment from 0 until 9. Once it reaches 10, it breaks outside the while loop. Okay? So we did something similar like to this with the while statement, with a while loop last class. But now we're using a for loop, and it's just a different way of looping through code, doing it over and over again. You can use a for loop, you can use a while loop for pretty much, well, while loops you can use for loops, but not necessarily vice versa. Now, keep this in mind, I can decrement I as well. So I can set I equal to 10 or number, and then while I is, or for I less is greater than 0, I minus minus. So that way I will start at a big number and keep decrementing until it reaches 0. Whereas in this example, I is starting at 0 and incrementing until it reaches whatever that number. So it's just different ways you can do the for loop. You can either go up or you can go down. All right.
So what would happen if instead of writing I++, I had wrote out like system.out.println, some like a letter or something? It'll just keep doing that. Yeah, until I was less than 1.
Yeah. So this, you need this in here. This is the structure of the for loop. You would put your code inside here. If
Okay.
you want to print out system.out 10 times, you would put it in here. All right, and I'll show you on this on the next slide. So the next slide, say for example, we want to print hello world 5 times, right? One way you can do this, you want to create a new project, Java application, next, lecture 13. All right, so one way of printing out system.out 5 times or hello world 5 times is system.out.println hello world, right? That's going to print it out 1 time, and I can just copy and paste this 5 times. And it's going to print this out 5 times, right? And you'll see that here, right? We can do explicit statements. System.out.println, hello world. But the issue is, what if we want to print this out 500 times? That's very inefficient, copying and pasting this 500 times. And what if we want to print it out 27 times, but we want to read that in from the user how many times to print it out? So the user might say, print it out 1,043 times. You don't know that before the user puts it into your program, right? And with a lot of programming, it's very user responsive. So whatever the user decides to do is how many times the program responds to it. So if that's the case, us explicitly stating how many times we're going to print it doesn't work. It doesn't scale. So we can use a while loop for this. Just a second. We can use a while loop for this, right? Int number equals 0, while number is less than 5, system.out.println, hello world, number plus plus. And we did this last class. So instead of this right here, we can have int number equals 0, while number is less than 5, right? Now we no longer need these because we're already going to do this. Close that while loop up. And then we have to increment number, number plus plus. And now this is going to print this 5 times, right? Using a while loop. Okay? We can also do this using a for loop, and the structure is just a little bit different, right? So I create a number up here, but you don't necessarily have to do that. So for int I equals 0, I is less than number, I plus plus, print out hello world. So int number equals 5. Let's do a for loop for int I equals 0, I is less than number, I plus plus. So now we create a for loop, and let's delete this right here. All right, we don't need to increment number anymore because I will take that place, and I increment each time. Be mindful that you do need these semicolons right here to separate these different statements. In I equals 0, I is less than number, I plus plus. Run this, and it prints this 5 times. Okay? But say, for example, like I was saying before, what if we want to loop this however many times the user says to loop it, right? We don't want to do this 5 times. We want the user to input something. So if you remember, in order to read user input, first let's prompt them, system.out.println, or print, enter the number of times you want to loop. Right? So that's the first thing. We want to prompt the user to tell us how many times they want to loop through this. I don't want to explicitly state that because I want my program to respond to them. So next we need a scanner. Scanner scan equals, or input equals new scanner, right? Because we want to read this in from the console. System.in.
So sorry for interrupting. I was getting my immunization shots today, so I'm a little late for class.
All right, I got you.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No problem. All right, so we have our scanner here, and again, we need to import our scanner. So you can either press this little light bulb right here, or Control-Shift-I, and OK. All right. So now we have our scanner, and now let's set number equal to input.nextInt. Okay. Now we're reading it in from the console, and if you notice here, I haven't explicitly set anything in this program except I equals 0. So now this program is responsive to whatever the user inputs. So if I run this, it's going to prompt me, enter the number of times you want to loop. I can essentially put any number into this program, and it will loop at that time. If I can put 52, and it will print hello world 52 times. okay? I can put in 10, and it will print it out 10 times. And this is how I grade your homework, right? I try a whole bunch of different inputs that should work, but if you had explicitly stated system.out.println, if you had put that in 5 times, your program wouldn't respond to me inputting a 10. It would still only print 5 times, right? So this is how you create a responsive program to whatever the user inputs, all right? Questions? Okay, there's no questions. I'm gonna continue. All right. So let's try this program. And you need to pay attention because this is very similar to what your homework or lab, one of the two, will be, right? Write a program that displays the following table. Note 1 mile is 1.609 kilometers. If you look at this, again, we could just print this out statement by statement, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and just do the calculation like that. But that's very tedious and inefficient, and it doesn't scale. So if I wanted to find out what 10,000 miles were in kilometers, I'd have to do this calculation 10,000 times? No, that doesn't work. Plus, I wanted to respond to user input, possibly. So let's do this. The first thing, if I look at this problem, the first thing is I know it's static, miles, kilometer. I know that's static, right? That doesn't need to be in a loop. That only needs to be printed out one time. So I'm going to print that out one time. System.out.println miles, kilometers, right? That only needs to be printed out once. It doesn't need to be printed out more than one time. All right. So if I look at the problem again, this section right here looks like it's going to be in the loop from 1 to 10. Right? But I want to go from 1 to 10. I don't want to go from 0 to 9, like a typical loop. So let's do a for loop. Int I equals 1. I want to start at 1. I is less than or equal to 10. Okay? Because I want it to go all the way up until 10. Then I plus plus. And there we go. Okay? So now we print out, we need the miles and then the kilometers. So looking right here, we already know this NI equals 1 to 10, that will be our miles, right? From 1 until 10. That can be our miles. So now all we need to do is calculate our kilometers. Double kilometer equals I times 1.609. And now we got our kilometers. I'll put S right here. And so all we need to do now is print this out. System.out.println I, because that's our miles, plus we're concatenating a string. I need a dash in here, then plus kilometers, right? And that'll print out that table from 1 until 10. Hit run. Let me see here. It prints out our miles to kilometers conversion. And actually, kilometers.
Wouldn't it be time point
Yeah,
1
that's
0?
it. Yep, that's it. Yep, times 0.1. Thanks for catching that. So now we have our miles to kilometers. And again, this for loop, we went to 10, but I can make this user responsive. So system.out.println, enter the max number of kilometers. All right. So I want the user to input whatever number we want to go to in kilometers. And max equals, oh, I need a scanner. Scanner input equals new scanner. System.in. And max equals input.nextIn. right? So now I'm reading in whatever the user types in, and then I want to go from 1 until max, right? So from 1 until whatever number they add in. The equation down here is still the same, and then we print it out. So now I can go from, it must be an integer, I can go from 1 until 84. And I can see what 84 miles is in kilometers. It's 135.156 kilometers. Let's change that to miles. Enter the max number of miles, because that's what the conversion is. Let's go, what is 500 kilometers? 804.5, 500 miles is 804.5 kilometers. Right, so I've made this program user responsive to whatever the user puts in. But I'm using a for loop because I know there will be a beginning, 1, and I know there's an end, max. I could do this in a while loop, but a for loop makes it a little bit cleaner. Another way you can use for loop is something we'll talk about in a couple weeks, are arrays. And if you remember back to last week, strings are arrays, okay? An array, all it is it's like a bucket, right? A big bucket, a long bucket. And there are different compartments inside that bucket. And each one of those compartments can have a different item in it. It can be a number, it can be another string, it can be a character, which is what a string is. It's a bucket, an array of characters, if you remember. And so for loops are really helpful if you want to iterate through that entire array. So let me show you an example. Let's say I have this string, hello equals hello world. I have this string, right? Say, for example, I want to go through each individual character within this string. One way I can do this is char first equals hello.char at 0, right? Char second equals hello.char at 1, right? Again, very inefficient and not very responsive. Because if I change the string to a longer length string, well, if it's a sentence, I don't know how long that sentence is, and I'd have to write a statement for each individual index. Well, in this case, I can use a for loop. I can do for and I equals 0, because all arrays and strings start at index 0. I is less than hello dot length, right? Because I want to go all the way until the end. And then I plus plus, increment I. Now I can do system.out.println hello.char at I. And that'll get each individual index and print it out. So see that down here? It gets each individual index and prints it out. Well, if you notice, I didn't put in an explicit statement right here. I didn't say less than 10, less than 4. Whatever hello.length is, and that can change, is how many times it's going to iterate through this. So we want to make this user responsive. System.out.println, enter a string. Let's make this a print. I need a scanner to read this in. System.in. Right, and instead of hello being explicitly set to hello world, let's set this equal to input dot next. Let's do line. If I just do dot next, remember it only gets the next string separated by spaces. But I want to get the entire line. I want everything. And then I want to print it out character by character. And if you look in this program right now, the only thing that's explicitly stated is this 0. And that's because with any string, you always start at 0. Any array, you start at 0. Right? That's the only thing that's explicitly stated. Other than that, everything is dynamic based on user input. So if I run this, enter a string. I am a sports person, so if you notice, a lot of my references are sports. I believe the NBA Finals start tonight. Right, that's my string. This program is going to read this whole string in, and then it's going to print it out. It's going to go through this whole string, character by character, print it out on a new line. So once I hit enter, it's going to go character by character and print it out on a new line. The NBA Finals. And then based on this, you can have if statements, you can have checks and balances. So in here, I can do if hello.char at I equals n. Right? I want to check if the character equals n. I want to say system.out.println this is an n. All right, so anytime there's an n, I want it to say that. If it's not an n, I want it to print out normally. Right? Let's do character dot to lowercase. Right? I want to check regardless if it's uppercase or lowercase n. Right? So if somebody inputs, so this first NBA right here, I'm going to lowercase that and then check if it equals a lowercase n. So that way, anytime there's an n, I'm going to get that if statement. If I run this, enter a string, the NBA Finals start tonight, right? So looking at this string, that if statement should hit right here, and right here, right? So once I hit run, you see it's happening. This is an N, this is an N, and this is an N. So you see that if statement being caught each time there's an N. That's why I did this lowercase. If I didn't have this two lowercase, this first NBA N would not have been caught because it doesn't equal a lowercase n. It was a capital N. All right. So again, arrays come in handy when you're trying to, not arrays, but for loops come in handy when you're trying to iterate through strings. And at its core, a string is an array. So we'll talk about arrays in a little while, but for loops will definitely come in handy when we talk about those. All right, there's one last example I want to do. So this one's a little wordy, but I will translate this once I read through it. Suppose the tuition for a university is $10,000, right? So this year, 2020, tuition is $10,000. Each year thereafter, it increases 5%. Right? So in 1 year, tuition would be $10,500. Write a program that displays the tuition in 10 years and the total cost of 4 years worth of tuition after the 10th year. All right, so what does this mean? Say, for example, the year 2020, tuition is $10,000. Each year from there, it increases by 5%. So we want to find out what the tuition would be in the year 2030. And then we want to find out what the total cost of tuition would be if somebody came in as a freshman starting in the year 2030. Okay. So that's what we want to look at. So the first thing we do is a variable for current year's tuition is $10,000, and the increase rate is 5%. So let's make variables for that. Double tuition equals 10,000, and double increase rate equals 0.05. All right, we know tuition is $10,000, and we know the increase rate is 0.05 or 5%. All right, the next thing we need to do, write a program that displays tuition in 10 years. So we know we need to iterate 10 times. Double years equals 1. So actually, let's not do that. Let's just do a for loop. For and I equals 1, because we know we're on year 1. I is less than or equal to 10. I plus plus. All right. So the first thing is I'm going to calculate whatever year we're in. Int year equals 2020 plus I. All right, so currently what we're doing right now would be the calculation for year 2021, right? The first time we go through this. Now let's calculate how much tuition would increase this year. Double increase rate, or increase, equals tuition times increase rate. Right? So however much tuition increases by is going to be held in this variable, which is tuition times 5%. Lastly, we need to just add this tuition increase to whatever tuition was. So tuition plus equal tuition increase. And remember that plus equal takes tuition and adds tuition increase to it. It's the same as if I did this. This would be the same statement as what I just had. All right. Same statement, but this obviously looks a lot cleaner and is less code. And then that's it. We would calculate whatever that tuition is. So I'm going to print this out so you can see this once I print it. All right. So let's do right here, system, actually up here. System.out, print line, 2020 tuition plus tuition. I'm going to print that out. System.out.print line, increase rate. I want to print this out. All right. And then down here, I'm doing all my calculations. Calculating tuition. So let's print this out as well. And I'm just going to make this look a little bit better once it prints out. This control N, or this was it \n, adds a new line to your print statement, just as an FYI. Let's print out system.out.println. Let's do year plus tuition, and then plus tuition. Before I do that, I'm going to print out what it increases by. So up here, I'm going to do another system.out.println, increase amount, and then the variable that we have to store that increase amount. Let's see. Where do we have there? All right, forgot the plus because I'm concatenating strings. So if I print this out, it should calculate, it has the 2020 tuition, students 10.0. It has the increase rate, and then it calculates for each year thereafter what tuition will be. So I hit run. All right, let's see the first one. 2020 tuition, $10,000. The increase rate is 0.05. So increase amount in the year 2021 is $500, and the tuition would be $10,500. And continues this process over and over again. Mind you, this is compounding interest, right? So each year, that amount, the increase amount is based off the previous year's tuition. So this is 5% of 10,500. This is 5% of 11,025, so on and so forth, all the way down to year 2030, and the tuition would be $16,288. That's crazy because some of us pay more than that in the year 2020. All right. So that's the first part of the program. The next part is to calculate the total cost of 4 years worth of tuition starting in year 2030. So if somebody is a freshman in 2030, we already have what tuition would be. So now let's calculate how much their total cost would be. So double total cost, right? Because this is going to be essentially a sum, right? So we could do sum cost of this. We need a for loop, for and I equals 0. I is less than 4. I plus plus, because we want to iterate through this loop 4 times. Now we just add tuition to this cost, plus equal tuition. And I could do this 4 times, calculate the cost. However, keep in mind, tuition does increase each year by 0.05%. So we would need these statements down here. And I put it after this because right now when we get down here, tuition is already the tuition cost for year 2030. I don't want to calculate that again because technically that would be the year 2031. So I put this after this so I can get the correct amount of tuition. And then system.out.println total cost of attendance plus some cost. Now, keep in mind this NI can only be used inside the for loop right here. Same here, NI is inside the for loop down here. So if you want to use anything outside of the for loop, you must declare it outside. So if you see here, I did the sum cost. I declared this outside the for loop. I'm adding to it inside the for loop, but I declared it out here so that I can use it again down here. These brackets are important. Whatever you declare inside these brackets, you can only use inside the brackets. So I can't use tuition increase outside of those brackets because I didn't declare it outside there. So I run this. It does all our calculations again for each year, and then it calculates the total cost of attendance for the year 20. This would technically be the year 2034, I believe. And this would be their total cost of attendance. All right. But again, let's make this responsive because why not? So instead of 10 years, let's do this for whatever the user wants to input. So let's say, for example, we're thinking long term. We're thinking about our grandkids. They're going to start school in the year 2045. So let's see what tuition would be in the year 2045. So system, and let's say we can adjust anything we want for this program. We can adjust the tuition, current tuition. We can adjust the increase rate, and we can adjust what year, how many years from there we're looking at. So let's do a scanner up here. Input equals new scanner, system.in. Then right here, we'll do system.out.println or print. Please enter the current tuition. And then we read in that tuition. Input.next double. Again, system.out.println. Please enter the increase amount. And if you notice, technically, I am making an interest calculator. So you could use this for a finance class as well, compound interest. And then let's set this equal to input dot next double. Lastly, system dot out dot print. Please enter the number of years for calculation. And max years equals input dot next int. And instead of 10 right here, we're going to do max years. So now we're going to calculate what tuition will be in whatever year we say. And then we'll calculate the sum cost of tuition for that person if they started in that year. Just to make this a little bit simpler, let's do int year equals 2020. And then down here, we'll do year plus equal I. And then I'm going to take this out right here and put this statement out here. That way, we don't see all those tuition calculations. All right, hit run. Please enter the current tuition. Let's say currently tuition is $16,000. I think that's roughly tuition, that's all. Please enter the increase amount. Let's say, for example, tuition increases because times are rough, for example. Let's say tuition increases by 20% or 0.2, right? Please enter the number of years for calculations. I want my grandchild to start school in the year 2050, so that's 30 years. So the tuition cost in the year, wait a minute, something didn't go right. So it says 2485. Ah, that's what I did. It's year, not plus equal. Year equals, what is it? Because we want year equals 2020 plus I. We only want it to increase by 1, whatever that number is. Actually, you know what? I don't even need all of this. It increases each year by 1. Year plus plus. We're gonna have that statement. Let's rerun this. Tuition starts at 16,000. The increase amount is 20%. Number of years is 30. All right. In 2050, the tuition cost would be, I think that's $3,298.21. And so over 4 years, that total cost of tuition would be, I want to say this is $20 million, e to the 7. So put 7 decimal places here. Tuition would be $20 million for that individual over 4 years, which is crazy. Let's repeat this. Let's do a more reasonable interest rate. Let's do an interest rate of 0.00 or 0.02%, right? And tuition increases by 2% each year. Enter. 30 years again. All right, that's a little bit more reasonable. So in the year 2050, tuition would be $28,981, and the total cost of tuition would be $119,000. All right, so just to recap, for loops are great when you know there's an explicit beginning and end, right? In this program, I create a scanner object right here. Then I read in whatever this year's tuition is, right? I asked the user to please enter the current tuition. Then I read that in right here into a double variable. And then I asked them what the interest rate is or increase amount. I read that in right here. Then next I asked them, how many years do you want to calculate this for? I read that in right here. The current year is 2020. So next I want to go into this for loop and I want to calculate tuition all the way up until whatever max year is the user input. So I start I at 1 and max years, I want to do I is less than or equal to max years. Since I'm not using I inside this for loop for anything other than just to iterate through, I can set I equal to 0. I is less than max years. The same thing will happen since I'm doing year calculation independent of I. But inside this for loop, I'm calculating the tuition increase, then I'm adding it to tuition. And this will repeat for 30 times, 40 times, 50 times. It's going to print out the tuition here for that final year. And then down here, I have a for loop that goes through 4 times. If we want to get fancy, we can say, how many years do you expect to graduate? And put that here. If somebody can graduate in 6 years, this would be 6 or 7 or 8. Then we calculate a sum cost of tuition just by adding tuition up. Remember, we have to do our tuition calculations, and then we print out the final cost of tuition. For loops are, again, really good for explicit beginnings and ends. Any questions? Well, we will have our lab on Friday. I'm sorry, go ahead. Is there a question?
No, sir.
All right. Well, we will have our lab on Friday. We will have our assignment on Sunday. The lab and assignment is, trust me, much simpler than what I just did in class. But I wanted to show you a real world example of using programming, right? A lot of times we tell you to do something and you don't really know how it applies to life. But clearly this would apply to life, right? We're calculating tuition increases. And then next week will be all makeup and review. I'll be available Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to help you with anything you have to make up or don't understand. If there are no other questions or no questions at all, that'll do it for today.
So what labs are due this week?
Did you take attendance?
I did take attendance. I got you. But this week we have lab 7, I believe. Let me look. And again, the full schedule is available